A single stone can tell a story of engineering, but 1,000 stones reveal a secret of administration. How did small kingdoms with limited means construct wonders that still dominate our landscapes today? The answer is not found in the quarries or the scaffolds, but in the scrolls and the tablets, in the quiet offices of ancient planners. This video will give you a new lens to see history, revealing how the invisible machinery of management turned modest realms into legendary construction powerhouses. We will uncover how a standardized measurement could align 1,000 workers and how a tax receipt for grain could fuel a decade of building. You will discover the hidden systems that allowed human ambition to be carved into mountains and raised toward the sun. What does it truly take to organize a miracle? That final stone, the capstone of a pyramid, was not the true summit of the project. The real peak was achieved months, even years earlier, in a room filled with papyrus, not granite. The foundation of every ancient wonder was poured not with water and sand, but with information and order. To see these structures as merely tombs or temples is to miss their grander truth. They are the physical proof of a civilization's ability to organize itself on a scale previously unimaginable. The real innovation, the one that separated a powerful kingdom from a forgettable one, was administrative. It was the understanding that the greatest challenge was not moving a 2-ton block, but knowing which block needed to go where, who would move it, what they would eat while doing it, and how to pay for it all. This was a paradigm shift of monumental importance. A small kingdom did not become a construction powerhouse by having stronger soldiers or richer minds alone. It became one by developing a system, a bureaucracy capable of turning chaotic human effort into a precise, predictable machine. Think of the Great Pyramid not first as a tomb for a pharaoh, but as the final receipt of history's most ambitious state-run enterprise. Its perfect angles speak of mathematical genius, yes, but its very existence shouts of logistical mastery. Thousands of workers fed from royal granaries housed in planned camps, their labor coordinated across decades. This was not magic, it was management. The stone is simply where the paperwork ended. So the mystery we are unraveling begins long before the quarry. It starts with a scribe dipping his reed pen into ink, making a mark on a clay tablet that translates human ambition into actionable instruction. That single administrative act, repeated and refined, is what truly built the ancient world. That mark on the scribe's tablet required a universal language, a set of rules understood by everyone from the quarry foreman to the royal accountant. Before a single stone could be cut, a kingdom had to answer a deceptively simple question. How long is long? The first and most fundamental innovation that powered these ancient projects was the birth of standardized measurement. In a world without blueprints as we know them, consistency in units was the closest thing to a shared vision. Imagine the chaos if every local governor, every master builder, used their own personal cubit, the length from elbow to fingertip. One foreman's foundation would never align with another's walls. Payment for labor based on volume of earth moved would be constant sources of dispute. The entire enterprise would crumble under the weight of its own inconsistencies before the first course of stones was ever laid. To build as one, they first had to agree how to measure as one. The solution was both brilliantly simple and profoundly powerful. The kingdom declared a master standard. In Egypt, this was the royal cubit, a precise length of stone or wood, often intricately carved and officially sealed. These were not mere rulers, they were instruments of state authority. Copies were distributed to sites across the land, ensuring that a cubit in Thebes was exactly the same as a cubit at Giza, hundreds of miles away. This was more than convenience, it was a revolution in trust and efficiency. A planner in the capital could now send a directive stating a wall must be 100 royal cubits long and know with certainty that a team he might never see would build it to the exact specification. This standard extended to weight and volume, governing the grain for workers' bread, the water for their mortar, and the taxes that funded it all. Fair exchange became possible because a bushel of wheat meant the same thing to everyone. We see this principle etched into the very fabric of ancient sites. Look at the mud bricks of the Indus Valley cities like Mohenjo-Daro. Across vast urban landscapes, the bricks maintain astonishingly consistent ratios. Their length is typically twice their width, and their height is a standard fraction of that. This was not an artistic choice, it was an industrial one. With standardized bricks, any team, anywhere in the city, could contribute to a project. Walls rose faster, repairs were simpler, and the entire cityscape achieved a harmonious, planned appearance that still impresses us today. The brick itself became a unit of construction, a three-dimensional pixel in a grand design. This common language of measurement dissolved distance and difference. It allowed a kingdom to act as a single, coordinated organism. A quarry team cutting stone in the south, a barge crew transporting it on the Nile, and masons fitting it in the north were all reading from the same invisible script. Their harmony was not magical, it was mathematical, enforced by a piece of certified wood or stone. The true foundation of their wonders was this agreement on a length, a weight, a volume. It was the first rule written in the administrative manual for building empires. But a common language, while vital, is only the beginning. You can tell every worker how long a cubit is, but you still need to know how many cubits of stone you have, how many workers are available to move it, and how much food they will need to do the work. This leads us to the next, even more pivotal innovation, one that transformed raw data into actionable power. A standard measurement tells you the size of a task, but it cannot tell you if you have the means to complete it. For that, you need memory, a memory far greater than any single person could hold. The second revolutionary innovation was the creation of the centralized archive, the ancient world's hard drive. This was the system that transformed ambition from a dream into a budget. How could a king in his palace possibly know the status of a project 100 miles away, or the contents of 1,000 scattered granaries? The answer was not in his mind, but in a room filled with clay tablets and papyrus scrolls. Written records turned the chaotic flow of resources into a map that could be read, analyzed, and commanded. In the bustling cities of ancient Sumer, this began with temple economies. Scribes recorded every transaction, every allocation of barley for worker rations, every shipment of bitumen for waterproofing, every tool issued from a central storehouse. A single tablet might list, in precise cuneiform, that 30 workers received 6 bushels of grain for 10 days of labor on the temple foundation. This was not just bookkeeping, it was the birth of accountability. A foreman could no longer claim shortages that never existed, and a planner could see, at a glance, if a project was consuming resources faster than planned. It allowed for auditing, for looking backward to understand patterns and forward to predict needs. This administrative leap enabled projects to scale in ways that were previously impossible. Consider the intricate palace complexes of the Minoans on Crete. Their archives, written on clay tablets in a script called Linear B, reveal an astonishingly detailed command economy. The palace at Knossos did not just rule, it managed. Tablets inventoried chariot wheels, textiles, and quantities of bronze, all stored in specific rooms within the palace. They record the distribution of rations to specialized workers, from shepherds to perfumers. This granular level of data meant the central authority could coordinate activities across the entire island, moving resources from where they were plentiful to where they were needed for construction or trade. It prevented catastrophic waste because you could not lose track of 1,000 copper chisels if each one was, in theory, accounted for on a fired clay ledger. The archive became the institutional brain of the kingdom. It created continuity across generations of workers and decades of construction. A new overseer could consult records from his predecessor to understand why a foundation was laid a certain way or how much limestone had been sourced the previous season. This broke the project free from the frailties of human memory and the whims of oral tradition. Decisions became based on data, not just intuition. The warehouse, the quarry, and the construction site were now connected by thin lines of ink and indentations in clay. A request for more timber did not have to travel as a vague plea. It could be sent as a formal requisition, referencing previous shipments and current inventory levels. This system of record-keeping did more than enable construction. It redefined the very nature of power. Control was no longer exerted solely through the spear, but through the stylus. The kingdom that could best document its resources and obligations could mobilize them with terrifying efficiency. The archive was the silent engine in the background, the hum of bureaucracy that made the spectacle possible. Yet, even with perfect measurements and perfect records, a monumental problem remained. You could know exactly what you had and exactly what you needed, but how did you move those resources and the people who used them across vast distances to the precise point of construction? This demands a third innovation, one that turned the map of the kingdom into a living, flowing network. The archive could map every resource, but it could not teach a man to carve stone. A blueprint is useless without a hand that knows how to follow it. This brings us to the third, deeply human innovation, the creation of a professional class of builders. We must move beyond the enduring myth of endless, anonymous slave labor. The true secret was not in overwhelming force, but in organized skill. Kingdoms learned that to build for the ages, they needed to invest in people, establishing permanent core of specialized artisans, from master stonemasons to expert carpenters and ingenious metallurgists. These were not temporary conscripts, they were career professionals, often housed, fed, and equipped by the state itself. Think of them as the ancient world's equivalent of a standing army, but their battlefield was the construction site and their weapon was precision. In Egypt, we find evidence of worker settlements like the village at Deir el-Medina, home to the artisans who built and decorated the royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings. These were not slaves living in squalor, but skilled workers and their families, receiving regular wages in the form of grain, fish, vegetables, and tools from state warehouses. They had their own community leadership, could file grievances, and even staged what might be history's first recorded labor strike when their rations were delayed. This system created stability. A mason could spend a lifetime refining his craft, knowing his basic needs were met by the institution that required his expertise. His knowledge did not vanish with the season, it accumulated, deepened, and was passed on. This is where we see the early roots of guild-like structures. While not the formal medieval guilds of later centuries, these professional groups operated on similar principles. They controlled the transmission of secret techniques, from the precise angle for cutting granite to the recipes for durable pigments or strong mortar. A young apprentice would learn not from a manual but from a master, ensuring that standards of quality were maintained across generations. This was a self-reinforcing system of excellence. The state provided security and resources, and in return, it received a workforce capable of executing visions of staggering complexity. Look at the bronze workers of the Shang dynasty in ancient China. Their ability to cast enormous, intricate ritual vessels like the famed Simu, Wu Ding required not just one artisan, but coordinated teams of miners, fuel gatherers, clay mold specialists, furnace tenders, and finishing experts. This was a symphony of specialized labor, each person a note in a process that could take months for a single piece. The knowledge of alloy ratios, firing temperatures, and piece mold construction was guarded, specialized knowledge preserved within these workshop lineages. This innovation transformed construction from a seasonal, ad hoc effort into a continuous, high-precision industry. When a king commanded a new temple or fortress, he was not starting from scratch, scrambling to find anyone who could lift a rock. He was activating a ready-made network of expertise. The quarry team knew exactly how to extract blocks with minimal waste. The transport crew understood the mechanics of sledges and barges. The fitting teams at the site could take those blocks and lock them together with joints so tight a razor blade could not slip between them. This was the power of the professional corps. It turned human skill into a reliable, deployable asset, as manageable as the grain in the silos or the copper in the treasury. The monument that resulted was not just a display of wealth, but a testament to a kingdom's most valuable investment, its people's knowledge. Yet, even with master craftsmen ready to work, a final, critical question remained for the planners in the archive room. How do you ensure that this entire machine, from the quarry to the capstone, moves in perfect, timely harmony? The answer lay in a system that could see the future, not with prophecy, but with calculation. Precision in the workshop meant nothing if the stone never arrived. The fourth, and perhaps most daunting, innovation was the mastery of logistics, the art of moving mountains one piece at a time. A master plan in the archives and skilled hands at the site were separated by a dangerous, expensive void of distance. The real test of an administration was not in its vision, but in its supply chain. How do you ensure that 1,000 tons of limestone from a quarry 50 miles away arrives at the rising pyramid face not a day too early and never a day too late? This required turning the entire kingdom into a clockwork mechanism of extraction, transport, and delivery. It began at the source with the transformation of raw landscape into a regulated industrial operation. Quarries were not just places where people happened to cut rock, they were meticulously organized enterprises. In Egypt, the quarries at Chura, famous for their fine white limestone, operated under direct royal control. Teams worked in coordinated shifts, following predetermined cutting lines to maximize yield and minimize waste. Scribes on site recorded output, marking blocks with quarry identifiers and rain years, creating a traceable inventory from the moment of birth. This was systematic mining, where every block was a known quantity in a grand equation. But a perfect block is a prisoner of geography until you set it in motion. This is where rivers became the ancient world's natural highways. The administrative genius lay in recognizing and harnessing these liquid roads. The Nile was not just a source of life, it was the central artery of the Egyptian state, and its calendar of floods and currents was baked into every construction timeline. The kingdom maintained dedicated fleets of heavy-duty barges, designed for a single, monumental purpose, to ferry stone from quarry to construction site. Timing was everything. Blocks were cut in the cooler months, then transported during the inundation season, when the Nile's swollen waters could float heavier loads and bring barges closer to desert construction sites via temporary canals. Imagine the coordination: a message from Giza to Chura, cut and prepare 200 facing stones. Months later, as the waters rise, those stones are loaded onto barges whose arrival at the downstream dock is anticipated by teams already building the ramps that will receive them. This was a symphony of seasonal knowledge and human scheduling. Where rivers could not go, roads were willed into existence. The massive stone moai of Rapa Nui, or Easter Island, present a profound logistical puzzle. How were these multi-ton statues transported miles from the quarry to their coastal platforms? While the exact methods are debated, the consensus points to a highly organized social effort. Researchers suggest the use of carefully prepared temporary roads, lubricated with sweet potato paste, and a rocking, walking motion powered by coordinated teams with ropes. This was not a haphazard drag, it was a slow, deliberate, and meticulously managed procession. The community's entire social energy was channeled into this rhythmic, step-by-step movement, a logistical ballet performed on a landscape of rolling hills. The ultimate administrative feat was synchronizing these disparate elements, quarry, transport, and site, into a seamless flow. A delay at any point created a cascade of failure. If barges arrived before the ramp was ready, they clogged the docks and risked sinking. If the ramp crews waited idly for stone, the entire project's rhythm faltered. The solution was a system of forward-looking communication and buffer stocks. Advance runners, likely on fast boats or chariots, carried updates on quarry progress and barge departures. Storage yards at the construction site held a small reserve of materials, a buffer against minor delays, ensuring the masons' work never stopped. This is the invisible masterpiece. The pyramid we see is static, but the process that built it was a dynamic river of stone, a constant, managed flow from earth to sky. The ramps themselves were not just inclined planes, they were the final piece of logistical infrastructure designed for efficient upward movement, their construction phases meticulously timed with the delivery schedule. The true wonder is not the stacked stone, but the fact that for decades the right block arrived at the right place at the right moment, with a reliability that would challenge modern projects. This logistical clockwork turned chaotic potential into structured reality, but even with a perfect supply chain, a final, fragile element remained: the human spirit. You could deliver all the stone and bread in the world, but if the people moving it felt cheated, exhausted, or hopeless, the entire machine would grind to a halt. This leads us to the most overlooked innovation of all, one that understood that monuments are built not just by hands but by hearts and minds. A workforce fed by state granaries points to a deeper economic mystery. Where did all that grain, all that copper, all that wealth actually come from? For many of these small kingdoms, the answer was not a vault overflowing with gold from conquest. It was something far more ingenious and far more sustainable. The fifth administrative innovation was the tax system, but not as we think of it today. This was a tax system designed not just to fill a treasury, but to directly fuel a national project, turning the entire economic output of the kingdom into construction capital. The most powerful form of this was in-kind taxation. Forget coins, which were rare or non-existent in many of these early societies. Instead, subjects paid their dues to the state in the very commodities the state needed most: labor, food, and raw materials. Imagine a farmer. His annual obligation might not be a sum of money, but a commitment to provide 20 days of labor on the king's new irrigation canal, or to deliver 10 bushels of his barley harvest to the royal storehouse. A timber merchant's tax might be paid in beams of a specified size and quality, delivered to the dock for the palace project. This system was breathtakingly efficient. It eliminated a costly middle step. The state did not have to collect money, then use that money to go out and buy grain, hire laborers, and procure timber. The tax itself was the grain, the labor, and the timber. The kingdom's administrative apparatus became a giant sorting and distribution hub, taking in the raw contributions of its people and channeling them directly to the point of construction. This created a self-reinforcing economic engine. A farmer paying his grain tax was not just fulfilling an obligation. He was literally feeding the worker who was building the road that would, in time, make it easier for that same farmer to get his surplus to market. The labor tax, often called corvée labor, was not mere drudgery. It was an investment in public infrastructure that benefited the entire community, from fortified walls for security to granaries for stability. We see this vividly in the Andean civilization of the Inca, masters of statecraft without a written script or currency. Their entire empire was built on a labor tax system called the mitre. Every household owed a certain number of days of labor each year to the state. This labor could be spent building the iconic stone terraces that climbed mountainsides, maintaining the vast network of roads that bound the empire together, or constructing temples and administrative centers. In return, the state provided security, hosted festivals, and ensured no one went hungry from its stocked storehouses. It was a reciprocal exchange, a social contract written in work. The system was so precise that Inca administrators, using their knotted string accounting devices called quippers, could calculate the available labor force for a project down to the individual, matching human resources to logistical needs with stunning accuracy. This model of in-kind taxation turned the kingdom itself into the project. The wealth of the nation was not hoarded, it was actively converted into tangible, enduring assets. A good harvest meant a larger grain surplus in the royal warehouses, which meant the state could support a larger workforce for a longer building season. A growing population meant a larger pool of labor tax contributors. This created a virtuous cycle where economic growth directly translated into construction capability. The kingdom did not need to wait for a lucky trade deal or a successful war to fund its ambitions. It simply needed to manage its internal economy with enough foresight to harness its own renewable resources, the sweat of its people and the fruit of its land. The tax receipt became the most important document in the archive, not as a record of wealth taken, but as a blueprint for wealth about to be built. It was the final, critical piece of the administrative machine, the mechanism that gathered the scattered energy of 1,000 fields and 1,000 homes and focused it with laser-like precision on a single, rising point of stone. This closed the loop, proving that the greatest power was not in having resources, but in designing a system that could continuously gather and redeploy them. Stone and bread were vital, but water was the ultimate currency of power. In the sun-scorched landscapes where many of these kingdoms took root, control over water was not a matter of agriculture alone, it was the very essence of administration. The sixth and perhaps most elemental innovation was hydraulic administration, a system that understood rivers and rainfall as resources to be commanded with the same precision as a workforce or a grain tax. This was not merely about digging ditches for crops, it was about engineering liquid highways for construction and sustaining the human engines that drove it. The state that could move water could move mountains. The most visible expression of this was the manipulation of waterways for transport. We often picture ancient stones moving over land on sledges, and they did, but that was the last, shortest leg of a much longer journey. The real mileage was covered by water. Administrators became masters of seasonal hydrology, reading the annual floods not as disasters to endure, but as opportunities to harness. In Egypt, the Nile's inundation was the kingdom's annual logistical windfall. Planners timed the cutting of stone in distant quarries to conclude just as the river began to swell. They then engineered temporary canals, branching off from the main river like delicate veins, dug by corvée labor teams to bring the water's edge as close as possible to the desert construction sites. A barge laden with granite could thus sail for hundreds of miles with the current, then be guided into a man-made channel that terminated at the foot of a rising pyramid. The stone never touched the desert sand until it was at its final destination. This was water management as strategic lifting, using the river's own power to do the work of 100,000 men. But the water's job was not done upon delivery. Vast worker settlements, sometimes housing thousands of artisans and laborers for decades, required a constant, clean water supply. A city of builders could not survive on the brackish water of desert wells alone. Here, administrative foresight extended to hydraulics on a municipal scale. Archaeologists studying the workers' village at Giza have found evidence of large, lined basins and a sophisticated drainage system. These were not accidental features, they were the result of centralized planning to capture, store, and distribute fresh water, likely brought by canal from the Nile. This ensured the health and stability of the workforce, preventing the kind of crisis that could halt a project for months. the administration was not just building a monument, it was building and maintaining a temporary city with all the utilities that required, and water was its most critical infrastructure. We see this dual-purpose mastery even more clearly in the high-altitude empire of the Inca. Their terrain presented an opposite challenge, not a shortage of water, but a need to control its fierce, seasonal flow down steep mountainsides. The Inca response was a breathtaking network of stone-lined canals, aqueducts, and fountains that served both agriculture and state projects. These channels would divert water to quarries, where it was used to split massive stone blocks by driving wooden wedges into fissures and then soaking them to make the wood expand. More importantly, this hydraulic network supplied the worker settlements that built their iconic terracing and road systems. The famous site of Machu Picchu itself is a marvel of water management, with canals feeding a series of ritual fountains and providing for the resident population. Every drop was accounted for and directed, a liquid testament to administrative control. This innovation fused the practical and the symbolic. A king who could bring a river to a building site was demonstrating a power that felt almost divine. He was showing his people that he commanded the most fundamental force of life itself. The canal that floated a stone today would irrigate their fields tomorrow. The reservoir that supplied the masons would water their herds in the dry season. Hydraulic administration created a powerful, tangible link between the glory of the state project and the welfare of the common person. It turned public works into a visible, life-giving promise. The ultimate administrative triumph was this synergy, where a single system, a network of waterways and the bureaucracy to manage it, simultaneously sustained the population and realized its grandest ambitions. The water that quenched a worker's thirst was the same water that had floated the block he was shaping. In the end, the kingdom did not just build with stone, it built with the very flow of the land, bending nature's most essential element to the will of a collective dream. The flow of water and grain was one thing, but the land itself presented a final, formidable obstacle. A king's grand vision for a new temple complex or a defensive wall often lay directly atop a farmer's field, a noble's ancestral estate, or a community's sacred grove. To simply take it by force would sow resentment and risk rebellion, crippling the project from within. The seventh, and perhaps most diplomatically delicate, innovation was the creation of formal legal frameworks for land and resource allocation. This was the administrative system turning its gaze inward, developing the rules and rituals necessary to peacefully reorganize the kingdom's own internal landscape in service of a monumental goal. It moved from logistics to law, ensuring that every stone had not just a physical path to the site, but a clear and legitimate title. The cornerstone of this system was the Land Grant Charter or Royal Decree. These were not simple commands, but elaborate legal documents, often inscribed on stone or metal for permanence. They served a dual purpose: to assert the crown's ultimate authority over all territory, and to meticulously detail the transfer of a specific plot from one party to the state's project. In ancient Mesopotamia, kings issued formal decrees to allocate temple lands or to authorize the use of specific canals and quarries for state construction. The language was precise, describing boundaries using known landmarks, roads, or neighboring plots. This legal precision transformed a vague royal wish into an actionable, undisputed fact on the ground. It told everyone, from the local governor to the humblest farmer, exactly what was changing and why. But authority alone was not enough. Lasting stability required a sense of fairness, or at least perceived justice. This is where we see the early principles of compensation and exchange emerge. The state understood that outright confiscation was a short-sighted strategy. Instead, many of these legal frameworks included complex systems of compensation. A noble family whose fertile riverside land was needed for a new palace might be granted a larger, albeit less developed, tract elsewhere. A community whose communal grazing land was earmarked for a quarry might receive a guarantee of tax relief for a generation, or a new state built well in a different location. In some cases, the compensation was symbolic but deeply significant, like a prominent inscription honoring the original landowner's contribution to the glorious project. This was administrative genius dressed in legal robes. It turned a potential victim into a participant, or at least a compensated stakeholder. The loss was acknowledged and offset, preventing a festering grievance that could later erupt into obstruction or violence. The legal framework provided a peaceful, procedural channel for what was inherently a disruptive process. We can see a fascinating example in later medieval periods, where charters for building great cathedrals often detail the purchase or exchange of dozens of individual plots within a crowded city, piecing together the sacred footprint parcel by parcel through documented agreement. This concept extended beyond dirt and stone to the most vital resource of all, people. Legal codes often formalized the labor tax, defining exactly how many days of service a household owed, and under what conditions they could be called up for a state project. This turned an arbitrary demand into a known, predictable obligation. A farmer knew that when the king's surveyors arrived to expand a canal, his required 20 days of work were not a random act of oppression, but the fulfillment of his legal duty for which the state, in turn, had a legal obligation to feed and shelter him. This reciprocal clarity was the glue that held the machine together. It prevented the project from being bogged down in endless local disputes. A foreman could point to the publicly displayed steel or the read-aloud decree as the final word on why this particular field was now a foundation trench. The legal framework provided the legitimate authority to mobilize resources on a kingdom-wide scale, transforming the king's personal ambition into the state's official project. It was the final administrative safeguard, ensuring that the steady flow of assets to the construction site was not just physically possible, but socially and legally uncontested. The true monument, then, stood upon a foundation of law as much as limestone, a testament to a kingdom's ability to reorganize itself from the inside out, not through chaos but through carefully crafted order. A legal decree carved in stone is powerless if it never leaves the capital. The eighth and most dynamic innovation was the creation of a state-run courier network, the kingdom's nervous system. In an age before instant communication, how could a planner in a palace possibly know if a quarry had flooded, or if a barge fleet was delayed by low water? The distance between decision and action was a void filled with uncertainty, and uncertainty was the enemy of any complex project. The solution was to turn that void into a highway of information, moving messages faster than the resources they concerned. The most famous example is the Royal Road of the Persian Empire, a masterpiece of administrative foresight. This was not just a path for trade, it was a dedicated information superhighway. At regular intervals, precisely measured 1 day's ride apart, the state built way stations. These were not inns for the public, but official relay posts stocked with fresh horses, supplies, and dedicated couriers. A messenger carrying a sealed clay tablet from the king would ride at a gallop to the first station, leap onto a waiting horse already saddled, and continue without pause. The message, not the man, did the traveling. This system could move urgent dispatches over 1,600 miles in less than a week, a speed that felt almost supernatural to the ancient world. For a construction project, this changed everything. It transformed management from a static plan into an adaptive process. A report of a landslide blocking a quarry could reach the capital in days. The administrator could consult his archives, assess his buffer stocks at the site, and send back new orders redirecting a different quarry team or adjusting the construction schedule, all before the original delay cascaded into a full stop. This was rapid, iterative problem solving across vast distances. The courier network created a constant two-way flow of data. It was not just for sending commands but for receiving intelligence. Regular progress reports from site foremen gave the central authority a real-time, if slightly delayed, dashboard of the entire enterprise. They knew how many courses of stone were laid this month, how much grain was consumed, and if worker morale was stable. This allowed for proactive adjustments, sending encouragement or extra rations to a struggling team before discontent festered. The system also enforced accountability in a profound way. A local official could no longer hide failures or hoard resources for months. The steady stream of royal messengers meant the king's eyes were, in a very real sense, everywhere. This network was the ultimate tool of synchronization. Think of a massive project like building a frontier fortress. The timber must arrive from the forests just as the masons finish the foundation. The metalworkers delivering the gate hinges must coordinate with the carpenters framing the doors. Without rapid communication, each group worked in a dangerous bubble of isolation, hoping their timing magically aligned with others they might never see. With a courier system, a single coordinator could send staggered departure orders to each supply source, calculated based on their distance and transport speed, so that all components converged on the site in a carefully orchestrated sequence. The clatter of hooves on the road was the sound of the kingdom thinking, reacting, and staying one step ahead of chaos. It wove the far-flung quarry, the remote logging camp, and the rising wall into a single, living organism. The monument that slowly took shape was therefore not the product of a single brilliant initial plan, but of thousands of small corrections, updates, and reinforcements flowing along those dusty roads, ensuring that the final form in stone matched the ever-refined vision in the minds of its creators. A message racing along the royal road still had to be received, understood, and acted upon by someone on the ground. This reveals the ninth, and perhaps most structurally elegant, innovation: the creation of a tiered bureaucracy and a clear system of delegated authority. No single ruler, no matter how brilliant, could personally oversee the cutting of every stone, the baking of every loaf, and the tallying of every receipt. The true administrative breakthrough was understanding that to build a physical pyramid, you first had to build an organizational one. This was the architecture of command, designed to distribute the immense cognitive load of a mega project across many shoulders, each bearing a manageable share of responsibility. At the very apex sat the king or pharaoh, the ultimate visionary and sponsor, but just below him was the linchpin of the entire operation, the vizier or chief minister. This individual was not just a political advisor, he was the kingdom's chief executive officer for construction. He translated the royal ambition into a master plan, approved major budgets of grain and labor, and served as the final court of appeal for disputes. He was the single point where the king's will met the kingdom's machinery. From this central command, authority cascaded downward in a carefully defined hierarchy. The kingdom was often divided into administrative districts or nomes, each with a governor responsible for mobilizing the local resources, labor, and materials required by the state project. A governor in the Delta region knew his quota of papyrus for ropes and his roster of men for the transport crews. Another in the south managed the output of a specific granite quarry. These officials did not work in isolation. They reported up the chain through formal channels, creating a flow of information that mirrored the flow of resources. On the actual construction site, this hierarchy became even more granular. A chief architect or master builder oversaw the technical design and daily progress. Beneath him were foremen for specific crews: the stone haulers, the masons, the plasterers, the carpenters. Each foreman was accountable for his team's output and conduct. And at the foundation of this entire administrative pyramid were the scribes, the men with stelae and tablets who documented everything. A site scribe recorded daily attendance, tools issued, and materials received. His records traveled up to the foreman, then to the site architect, and eventually were synthesized into reports for the vizier's archive. This structure created a powerful framework of accountability at every level. A delay in laying a course of stones could be traced back. Was it the fault of the quarry foreman for sending flawed blocks, the transport crew for a late barge, or the mason team for slow work? The tiered reporting lines made such diagnostics possible. It also prevented any single point of failure. If a district governor fell ill or proved incompetent, the system did not collapse. The vizier could appoint a temporary replacement, and the well-defined roles of the subordinate scribes and foremen meant operations could continue with minimal disruption. This delegated authority empowered decision-making where it mattered most. A foreman on a distant ramp did not need to send a messenger to the capital for permission to reassign a team to repair a cracked sled. Within the scope of his defined authority, he could solve the problem on the spot, keeping the workflow moving. This balance between central control and local initiative was the system's genius. The king's vision provided the unwavering destination, but the tiered bureaucracy provided the flexible, responsive map to get there. We see this model perfected in the Roman Empire's later projects, where military-style organization was applied to civil engineering. A project like building a major aqueduct would have a chief engineer appointed by the emperor, under whom served military tribunes overseeing different legions of workers, each legion broken into centuries with their own centurions, and so on down to the individual work gang. Clear ranks, clear duties, clear reporting. This was not red tape, it was the operating system that allowed thousands of individuals, who might never meet the man in charge, to contribute to a single, flawless outcome. The administrative pyramid was, in many ways, a more impressive and enduring construction than the stone one it built. It was a living system that could learn, adapt, and replicate its success, project after project, turning a kingdom's sporadic bursts of glory into a sustained legacy of built ambition. Yet, even the most perfect organizational chart faces one ultimate, unpredictable test: the passage of time and the transfer of power from one generation to the next. A perfect hierarchy could still crumble from within, not from rebellion, but from simple, quiet corruption. The 10th and final pillar of this administrative revolution was perhaps the most cynical and the most necessary: standardized accounting and audit procedures. Innovative kingdoms realized that trust in a foreman or a warehouse keeper was not enough. They needed a system of verification, a way to ensure that the river of resources flowing from the treasury to the worksite arrived intact, every last grain and copper chisel accounted for. This was the birth of bureaucratic oversight designed to make honesty the easiest path. Scribes did far more than passively list deliveries. They actively reconciled them against the master project plan. Imagine a clay tablet arriving at a pyramid site, detailing a shipment of 100 sacks of barley from a southern estate. The receiving scribe would not simply file it away. He would check it against the central ledger's expected deliveries for that month, and then issue a receipt back to the estate, creating a paper trail, or rather, a clay trail in duplicate. This created an early form of accountability we might recognize today. Officials developed precursor systems to double-entry bookkeeping, where every transaction was recorded in two separate ledgers, often kept by different scribes. One record might stay at the source, the quarry, noting the dispatch of 50 limestone blocks of specific dimensions. An identical, matching record traveled with the shipment to the construction site. Upon arrival, the site scribe would count the blocks and compare them to the shipping manifest. A discrepancy triggered an immediate investigation. Was it a counting error at the quarry, a theft during transport, or damage that rendered a block unusable? This cross-referencing of independent records created a powerful audit trail. We see this meticulousness in the administrative archives of ancient empires. In Mesopotamia, audits were a formal affair. Higher officials would periodically arrive at a temple or palace warehouse, unannounced. They would not take the local scribe's word for the inventory. Instead, they would physically count the stacks of leather, the jars of oil, and the bundles of reeds, comparing the actual stock against the clay tablet records. Discrepancies had to be explained, with missing items documented as legitimate losses or charged against the responsible official. This culture of financial and material accountability was a force multiplier for efficiency. It meant that the precious resources extracted from the people through taxation were not squandered through graft or incompetence. A corrupt official could not easily siphon off grain for personal profit if his records were routinely checked against those of the transport captain and the site steward. The system protected the project from its own human frailties. Every bushel of grain fed a worker, not a black market. Every block of stone reached the ramp, not a nobleman's private villa. This relentless focus on verification maximized the impact of every contribution on the final, soaring structure. The audit was the administrative immune system, constantly scanning for waste and fraud, ensuring the health of the entire enterprise. It completed the circle of control, proving that the ultimate power lay not in having resources or even moving them, but in knowing with unshakable certainty exactly where every single one of them had gone. The relentless pursuit of accounting reveals a system, but the true test of any framework is how it functions in the real world. For a perfect case study, we must sail across the wine-dark sea to the island of Crete during the Bronze Age, to the labyrinthine palace of Knossos and its mysterious Minoan builders. Here lies a profound historical puzzle. These were not fortress builders like their contemporaries. The grand palaces show no massive defensive walls, no towering ramparts designed for siege. They were sprawling, open complexes of courtyards, storerooms, and light wells, adorned with vibrant frescoes of dolphins and bull leapers. How did such an apparently peaceful, small island kingdom become a construction powerhouse, a dominant maritime trader whose influence stretched across the Aegean? The answer is not etched in battlements but in clay. The administrative genius of the Minoans is preserved in their most enigmatic artifacts, the linear tablets. These are not epic poems or royal decrees. They are inventory lists, the dry, meticulous records of a hyper-efficient central administration. They detail, in careful script, the contents of the palace's vast, magazine-like storerooms, row upon row of giant jars called pithoi. One tablet might list quantities of olive oil, another counts stores of grain, wool, or precious saffron. This was not hoarding, it was strategic stockpiling. The palace operated as the beating heart of a redistribution economy. It collected the agricultural surplus and crafted goods from the surrounding countryside, logged it all in clay, and then redistributed these resources to specialized workers, to trading expeditions, and to its own ambitious construction projects. The tablet was the transaction, the proof of a flow managed not by force but by meticulous record-keeping. This system enabled a breathtaking specialization of labor. Within the palace complex itself, archaeologists have identified distinct workshop areas. There were quarters for skilled potters turning the distinctive Khmer's ware with its elegant spirals, for metal workers casting intricate daggers and ritual vessels, for stone vase makers, for fresco painters, and for textile producers working with luxurious dyes. These were not generalists, they were master artisans, likely supported directly by the palace's redistributed resources, receiving rations of food and raw materials in exchange for their crafted goods, which the palace would then use or trade. This administrative model turned the entire kingdom into a kind of integrated corporation, with the palace as its headquarters and logistical hub. The most stunning physical evidence of this administrative mastery, however, flows literally beneath their feet. The Minoans engineered Europe's first truly sophisticated plumbing and drainage systems. At Knossos, one finds carefully laid terracotta pipes with tapered joints to prevent leaks, designed to supply fresh water to royal quarters and ritual areas. Even more impressive are the complex drainage conduits and stone sewers that ran beneath the palace floors, managing waste and stormwater with a foresight that would not be matched for over 1,000 years. This was not a decorative luxury, it was the ultimate proof of centralized planning and public resource management. A system that could coordinate the design and installation of such hidden, kingdom-wide infrastructure was a system capable of anything. It speaks to an administration that concerned itself with the health of the community and the longevity of its structures, a civil engineering mindset. So the mystery of the unfortified palace unravels. The Minoans built their power not on walls of stone, but on walls of clay tablets and networks of pipes. Their security came from economic interdependence and administrative control, not just from spears. By perfectly mastering the art of redistribution, specializing their workforce, and investing in foundational infrastructure, this small island kingdom transformed itself into a legendary maritime civilization. Their palaces were not castles, they were the physical manifestation of a brilliant administrative machine, a machine so effective it needed no towering walls to proclaim its strength. Its authority was written in ledger lines and channeled through clean, running water. These administrative systems were not a universal blueprint, but a flexible toolkit. Far to the south, in the windswept highlands of Ethiopia, a different kingdom faced a radically different set of challenges and authored its own stunning chapter in this story. The kingdom of Aksum did not have the predictable placid Nile. Its terrain was rugged, mountainous, and unforgiving. Yet here, they chose to erect some of the largest single pieces of stone ever quarried and moved by human hands, the towering Aksumite obelisks. How does a civilization with limited flat land and no major river highways decide to build monuments that seem to defy their very geography? The answer lies in a masterful adaptation of administrative principles to a unique environment, proving that innovation is not about copying but about context. Aksum's power stemmed from a brilliant economic strategy. It sat at a critical crossroads, controlling the trade routes between the interior of Africa and the Red Sea ports that connected to Rome, Persia, and India. Gold, ivory, exotic animals, and incense flowed through its markets. This was not a wealth based on taxing grain from farmers, but on taxing the movement of luxury goods. The kingdom's administrative genius was in monetizing this flow, collecting customs duties and fees that filled its coffers with the most versatile resource of all, currency. Axum minted its own gold coins bearing the faces of its kings, a powerful statement of economic sovereignty. This liquid wealth provided a flexibility that grain taxes did not. It meant Aksum could pay for specialized labor, import unique materials if needed, and fund projects without completely reorganizing its domestic agricultural base. The trade wealth was the fuel, but the engineering problem remained immense. Moving a 100-foot-tall, several hundred-ton stone needle across broken ground to its ceremonial site seems like madness. Here, Aksumite builders demonstrated a quiet, brilliant innovation in their masonry technique, now called the monkey head style. Instead of trying to move perfectly smooth, monolithic pillars, they designed their obelisks with a series of projecting stone blocks and corresponding indentations on all sides. From a distance, these look like decorative paneling, but their true function was profoundly practical. These projections acted as built-in handles. They allowed workers to attach ropes and wooden levers at multiple points along the entire length of the obelisk, distributing the lifting and pulling force. It transformed a slippery, unwieldy giant into something the workforce could grip and manipulate with greater control. This was a design decision made at the quarry, an administrative mandate for practicality that was carved into the stone itself. It simplified the logistics of movement by giving the laborers something to literally hold onto. The final adaptation was likely in the organization of the workforce itself. Aksum was not a densely packed, centralized state like Egypt. It was a network of settlements spread across the highlands, connected by allegiance and trade. To mobilize for a monumental project, the Aksumite kings probably relied on a decentralized labor system. Local communities, perhaps during the agricultural off-season, would have been called upon to contribute teams of workers for a set period, fulfilling a labor obligation to the crown. These teams, coming from different districts with their own local leaders, would have been coordinated by royal overseers on site. This model leveraged the kingdom's dispersed population without requiring a permanent pyramid city of workers. It was a logistical network built on social obligation and timed to the rhythms of the highland climate. The result was a forest of stone needles piercing the African sky, not as tombs but as majestic markers of authority and connection to the divine. Each obelisk was a receipt, paid for by the taxes on 1,000 camel caravans, designed by engineers who understood friction and force, and raised by the collective strength of a kingdom united not by a river but by a royal command. Axum teaches us that the administrative playbook is not rigid. When you lack a river, you build wealth on trade routes. When you lack flat ground, you carve handles into your stones. When you lack a central population, you organize a seasonal, networked labor force. It was a powerhouse built not by overcoming its environment, but by listening to it and adapting its systems accordingly. Aksum adapted its systems to highland trade, but in the humid floodplains of Southeast Asia, another kingdom faced the opposite challenge: water in overwhelming abundance. The sprawling stone complex of Angkor Wat, with its iconic lotus bud towers, rises from the Cambodian jungle not as an isolated monument, but as the spiritual heart of a vast, low-density metropolis. For centuries, the sheer scale of this urban landscape puzzled historians. How could a pre-industrial kingdom support a population possibly reaching 1 million people across an area larger than modern New York City? The answer was not found in towering walls or dense streets, but in the earth itself, in a hidden grid of water that turned seasonal deluge into a source of perpetual power. The true masterpiece of the Khmer Empire was administrative, a hydraulic network of breathtaking ambition that managed water for every facet of life. This was a system where a single canal could serve as a highway for construction stone, a boundary for a rice paddy, a source of drinking water, and a sacred reflection of the cosmic ocean all at once. The genius of Khmer administrators lay in their holistic vision. They did not see land and water as separate domains to be managed by different officials. They saw them as a single, integrated resource matrix. At the center of this matrix were the massive barrays or reservoirs, giant artificial lakes meticulously engineered with earthen dikes. The largest, the West Barray, is an astonishing 5 miles long and 1.5 miles wide, holding over 50 million cubic meters of water. Building such a feature was a century-spanning administrative project, requiring the coordination of thousands of laborers to move millions of cubic meters of earth. But the barray was not just a static tank, it was the central battery of the entire system. From these vast reservoirs, a carefully calculated network of canals radiated outward, like arteries branching from a heart. Smaller channels distributed water to community tanks and temple moats, while major canals served as transport routes, allowing barges laden with sandstone from distant quarries to sail directly to the foot of rising temple mountains. This grid performed a delicate annual balancing act with the region's fierce monsoon climate. For half the year, torrential rains threatened catastrophic flooding. The canals and reservoirs captured and stored this excess, preventing the low-lying city from drowning. Then, during the long, dry season, when rivers shriveled and the land baked, the system reversed its flow. Administrators could release stored water in a controlled manner from the barrays, channeling it through the canals to irrigate vast rice paddies that stretched to the horizon. This transformed agriculture from a risky gamble into a predictable engine of surplus. A reliable triple rice harvest each year could feed the massive population, free up labor for construction projects, and generate the wealth needed to fund them. The water management system was, in essence, the kingdom's economic policy written across the landscape. The administrative oversight required to keep this machine functioning was immense. It demanded a bureaucracy with long-term memory and technical skill. Scribes and surveyors, likely under a powerful minister of water, would have maintained detailed records of canal depths, dike integrity, and silt accumulation. They planned the dredging of channels before the monsoon hit, organized the repair of breaches in reservoir walls, and adjudicated disputes between communities over water rights. This was a continuous, quiet campaign of maintenance that prevented the system from collapsing into swamp or desert. The grid also provided the literal fluid for construction itself. Sandstone blocks quarried from Mount Cullen to the northeast were floated down specially constructed canals on rafts during the flood season. The sacred geometry of the temples, perfectly aligned to cardinal points, was made possible by this liquid highway that delivered precision-cut stone with minimal overland dragging. Most profoundly, the hydraulic grid was the physical expression of Khmer cosmology, a spiritual administrative tool. The temples, like Angkor Wat, were designed as microcosms of the Hindu universe, with the central tower representing Mount Meru, the home of the gods, surrounded by concentric moats symbolizing the cosmic oceans. The vast reservoirs and canals were the macro-scale version of this same vision, turning the entire kingdom into a sacred, engineered landscape. By controlling water, the god-kings of Angkor were demonstrating their divine mandate to maintain the cosmic order itself. The administrative act of releasing water for irrigation was not just practical, it was a ritual, a renewal of the contract between heaven and earth. This fusion of spiritual authority and technical mastery is what made the system so resilient and so deeply accepted. The farmer tending his rice paddy knew that the water nourishing his crop flowed by the grace of the king through channels that mirrored the heavens. The legacy of Angkor, therefore, is not a collection of beautiful, abandoned temples. It is the ghost of a grid. When you look at aerial surveys today, you do not just see jungle and stone, you see the faint, geometric scars of canals and the outlines of vast, empty reservoirs. This ghost grid tells the story of an administrative mindset that sought not to conquer nature, but to orchestrate it on a grand scale. It allowed a regional kingdom to solve the fundamental puzzles of urban life, food, water, transport, and spiritual meaning with a single, integrated system. The temples were the glittering pinnacles of this achievement, but they were sustained by the profound, earth-moving intelligence of the administrators who understood that to build toward the gods, they first had to master the flow of the earth itself. The ghost grid of Angkor was a kingdom's signature, but power can also be written in silence. In the high desert of the American Southwest, a different kind of wonder rises from the dry earth. The monumental great houses of Chaco Canyon stand not as palaces for kings, but as testaments to a society that built complexity without a crown. The ancestral pueblones, also known as the Anasazi, created a landscape of coordination that defies our traditional templates for how civilizations organize. Here, there is no evidence of a central ruler's tomb, no grand statues of pharaohs, no royal decrees etched in stone. Instead, we find a network woven from ceremony and exchange, a system where administration was not commanded from a throne, but agreed upon across a community of shared belief. How did they align the labor of thousands to construct multi-story buildings with hundreds of rooms, perfectly aligned to celestial cycles, without a monarch to issue the orders? The answer lies not in a scepter, but in a network of roads that lead to a common center. Chaco Canyon is remote and austere, a place of scorching summers and bitter winters, seemingly an unlikely spot for a powerhouse. Yet between the years 900 and 1150, It became the epicenter of a vast cultural sphere. The great houses, like Pueblo Bonito with its distinctive D-shaped layout and hundreds of rooms, are not haphazard villages. They exhibit a masterful, pre-planned architecture. Their walls are made of precisely shaped sandstone blocks, laid in intricate patterns, and their foundations are aligned with breathtaking precision to the movements of the sun and moon. This was not the work of a single family or clan expanding their home over generations. This was a coordinated, communal project executed on a scale that implies a shared vision and a shared schedule. But if there was no king in Chaco, what was the binding force? Archaeologists point to two interlocking systems, a ritual calendar and a regional trade network, that together functioned as a sophisticated, non-coercive administration. The great houses themselves were likely less about everyday living and more about periodic gathering. Their design suggests they were centers for ceremony, storage, and astronomy. The alignment of walls and windows to capture the solstice sun or the lunar standstill would have required generations of precise observation, a knowledge held and passed down by a ritual elite, perhaps priests or clan elders. This shared celestial knowledge created a common ideological framework. It gave everyone in the region a shared calendar, a sacred schedule that dictated when to plant, when to harvest, and crucially, when to gather. Imagine a society where the most important administrative directive is not a tax demand, but an astronomical event. When the sunbeam touched a specific marker on the back wall of a canyon alcove, it was time. Communities scattered across the harsh landscape, sometimes 50 or more miles away, would prepare to journey. They would converge on Chaco, bringing not just themselves, but offerings, materials, and their labor as a form of pilgrimage and participation. This is where the second system, the trade network, seamlessly integrated. Those converging paths were not just foot trails, they were formalized roads some 30 feet wide, carved straight across the desert floor, up and down mesa cliffs with elaborate stairways. These roads, which radiate out from Chaco like spokes on a wheel, are not efficient travel routes for individuals. They are processional ways, engineered for groups moving together toward a common destination. And what did they bring? The material record is stunning. The timber for the massive roof beams, thousands of logs, came from mountain forests over 50 miles away. Turquoise arrived from distant mines to the south, seashells from the Pacific coast, macaw feathers from the tropics of Mexico. Chaco was a ritual clearinghouse, a place where exotic goods, imbued with spiritual significance, were gathered, exchanged, and redistributed. This flow of rare materials likely fueled the construction machine. A community coming to Chaco for a major ceremony might contribute its labor on the great house as part of its devotional practice. In return, they might receive sanctioned amounts of ritually important goods like turquoise or cacao to take back to their home villages, reinforcing the status of their own leaders and their connection to the sacred center. It was a reciprocal system of obligation and prestige, managed not by tax collectors, but by ritual specialists who controlled the calendar and the distribution of spiritually charged goods. The administration was embedded in the cosmology. Building a wall at Pueblo Bonito was not just construction, it was an act of world building, of helping to maintain the cosmic order. The coordination was achieved because everyone believed in the importance of the task and their place within the shared, sacred geography. The Chaco phenomenon challenges our deepest assumptions about power and administration. It shows us that a complex society can achieve monumental works through consensus, ceremony, and carefully managed reciprocity. There was no central archive of clay tablets, no standing army to enforce labor drafts, no royal courier network. Instead, there was a shared faith in the sky, a network of roads for pilgrimage, and a system of exchange that turned exotic feathers and blue stones into social glue. The great houses are the physical proof of this agreement. a collective signature written in stone and aligned with the stars. They stand as a powerful reminder that the human capacity for large-scale organization can take many forms, and sometimes the most compelling directives are not shouted from a palace, but whispered by the turning of the heavens. The silent consensus of Chaco Canyon gave way to a very different kind of clamor centuries later across the Atlantic. In the towns and cities of medieval Europe, a new architectural dream pierced the sky, not for a king or an emperor, but for a divine audience. The great Gothic cathedrals, with their impossible heights and forests of stained glass, seem like products of pure faith, yet their soaring stones tell another, more familiar story. They are the proof that the ancient administrative playbook for building powerhouses had not been forgotten, only repurposed. The cathedral chapter, a committee of clergy, did not command armies or collect grain taxes across a kingdom. But within the sphere of its sacred mission, it operated with the precision and ambition of a small state, facing the same eternal puzzles of resource management, specialized labor, and long-term funding. The workforce was no longer a corvée labor force summoned by royal decree, but a coalition of highly independent specialists, the craft guilds. These were not temporary groups, but permanent corporate bodies that controlled the secrets of their trades, from the stonecutters and masons to the carpenters, glaziers, and metalworkers. Each guild was a mini administration unto itself, regulating apprenticeship, quality standards, and wages. For the cathedral chapter, this presented both a challenge and an opportunity. They could not simply command obedience, they had to negotiate contracts, a complex web of agreements that turned the construction site into a partnership between spiritual authority and secular expertise. The administrative genius was in harnessing this distributed skill. The chapter provided the grand vision and the central coordination, while the guilds provided the guaranteed quality and trained manpower. It was a tiered bureaucracy forged not by edict, but by mutual interest and sworn oath. Funding this centuries-long endeavor required financial innovation that rivaled the engineering. A cathedral could take more than 100 years to complete, far outliving its original patrons. How do you budget for a project that spans generations? The answer was a suite of elaborate fundraising tools that functioned as a medieval capital campaign. Wealthy nobles might donate land, the rental income from which would fund construction in perpetuity. More ingeniously, chapters sold annuities, a form of long-term investment where a citizen would pay a lump sum to the cathedral fund and in return receive a fixed annual payment for life. This provided immediate, large-scale cash for building while spreading the cost over decades. Then there were the spiritual incentives, the sale of indulgences which promised reduction from punishment for sins, and the veneration of holy relics which drew pilgrims by the thousands. A pilgrim's journey was not just an act of devotion, it was an economic event. They needed food, lodging, and souvenirs, and they left donations at the shrine. The pilgrimage route became a revenue stream meticulously managed by the church. This blend of sacred appeal and savvy finance created a sustainable economic engine, turning faith into a renewable building material. Overseeing this vast, slow-moving enterprise was a unique figure, the itinerant master mason. He was neither a priest nor a noble, but a superstar engineer and administrator. Think of him as the project's chief executive officer, a man who carried the secrets of Gothic geometry in his mind and the authority of the chapter in his ledger. He would travel from one great project to another, bringing cutting-edge techniques like the flying buttress or the ribbed vault. His most crucial tool was not his chisel, but his template. He crafted full-scale wooden patterns for the complex stone shapes, allowing less skilled workers to execute his precise designs. This master mason was the living link between the archive and the arch, translating the parchment plans into three-dimensional reality. He managed the guild foremen, approved shipments of stone from specific quarries, and reported progress back to the chapter. His career was a testament to a professional class reborn, a single mind holding the technical and logistical map for a monument meant to outlast empires. The cathedral rising over a medieval city was therefore a marvel of layered administration. Its foundation was sunk not only into the earth, but into a network of guild contracts, annuity ledgers, and pilgrimage routes. It was built by a society that had rediscovered, through trial and error, the same principles that powered the pyramids and the palaces of old: the need for standardized craft, audited finance, and delegated expertise. The sacred space was made possible by profoundly worldly systems, proving that the architecture of belief always rests upon the scaffolding of meticulous human organization. This enduring pattern raises a final, pivotal question. If these administrative systems are so powerful, so universal across time and culture, what happens when they are not used to build wonders, but to control populations in a different way? A divine mandate can move stones where a royal command might meet resistance. Across these ancient construction powerhouses, a shared state religion was far more than a collection of myths and rituals. It was the most sophisticated piece of administrative software ever devised. It provided the ultimate answer to the why, transforming backbreaking labor from a burdensome tax into a sacred duty and turning complex state logistics into a holy mission. This ideology was the intangible operating system that made the tangible hardware of quarries, granaries, and ledgers function with a shared purpose. Without this spiritual framework, the entire machine risked stalling under the weight of its own demands. How do you convince a farmer to leave his fields for 20 days to haul stone? You could threaten him with a soldier's spear, or you could inspire him with a priest's promise. The latter builds not just a wall, but a legacy of devotion. The state religion offered a cosmic justification for the monumental reallocation of a society's energy. The labor tax, the corvée system, was rarely presented as mere service to a king. It was framed as service to the gods themselves, or to a king who was a living god or a god's direct representative on earth. In Egypt, the pharaoh was the intermediary between the people and the divine order, Mat. Building his tomb, the pyramid, was not about glorifying one man. It was about ensuring the continued harmony of the universe. A worker carving a hieroglyph or hauling a block was participating in a ritual as vital as any prayer, helping to maintain the cosmic balance that guaranteed the Nile would flood and the harvests would come. This belief transformed the construction site from a workplace into a temple precinct, where every swing of a hammer had spiritual significance. This divine mandate streamlined decision-making to an extraordinary degree. When a project is ordained by the gods, debate is minimized. The architectural plan is not a subject for committee revision. It is a revelation, often based on celestial alignments or sacred geometry. Disputes over resource allocation could be settled by reference to divine will as interpreted by the priestly class, who worked hand in hand with the civil administrators. There was no higher court of appeal. This fusion of spiritual and temporal authority created a seamless chain of command, where the king's order and the god's will were presented as one and the same. It motivated the workforce on a level that mere wages or rations never could. A daily bread ration sustains the body, but the promise of participating in something eternal, of earning divine favor or a better station in the afterlife, sustains the spirit. We see this in the artifacts left behind by workers, like the graffiti inside the Great Pyramid citing the names of work gangs with proud titles like the Friends of Khufu. This suggests a sense of collective identity and purpose that transcended simple coercion. The project itself became the ultimate embodiment and propaganda tool of the ideology. The rising temple or pyramid was a constant, visible sermon in stone. Its sheer scale demonstrated the power of the gods and their chosen ruler. Its intricate carvings told the sacred stories that unified the culture. For the citizen seeing it take shape over years, it was a perpetual reminder of the divine order that structured their world and justified their contributions. In the Andes, the Inca ruler was the Sapa Inca, the son of the sun god Inti. The construction of monumental sites like Sacsayhuaman or the network of roads was not public works in a secular sense. It was the earthly duty of the children of the sun to organize the world in reflection of the celestial order. The terraces that climbed the mountainsides were both agricultural miracles and acts of worship, shaping the land into a form pleasing to the gods. The system of labor tax, the mitre, was part of this reciprocal relationship with the divine. Finally, this religious framework legitimized the massive, often painful, resource allocation required. Concentrating so much of a society's wealth and labor in one non-agricultural, non-defensive project is a risky gamble. It can lead to famine, unrest, and collapse. But when that project is a gateway to the gods, a necessary anchor for the cosmos, or a home for a deity that protects the nation, the risk is reinterpreted as a sacred investment. The grain taken from storehouses, the copper diverted from tools, the lifetime spent in service, all were framed as offerings, the necessary cost of maintaining favor with powers far greater than any human king. The administration managed the flow, but the religion sanctified the source and the destination. It turned accounting into liturgy and logistics into a form of collective prayer. The silent stones of these ancient sites, therefore, are not silent at all. They are the frozen echoes of a powerful, unifying story, a story so compelling it convinced generations to willingly pour their lives into its construction. The true mortar holding these wonders together was not just lime and sand, but faith, a carefully cultivated belief that they were not building for a man, but for eternity itself. This raises a final, haunting reflection for our modern world of steel and silicon. Faith can move mountains, but administration must feed the people who push them. The very systems that enabled these breathtaking achievements contained a hidden, dangerous flaw, a tendency to become self-perpetuating machines that could eventually consume the kingdoms they built. To truly appreciate the power of administrative innovation, we must also witness its limits, the moments when the bureaucratic blueprint tore under the weight of its own ambition. The history of construction powerhouses is also a history of quiet overreach, where the drive to build crossed a line from sustainable investment into catastrophic drain. We can see this shift subtly in the archaeological record of Egypt itself. Look at the progression of the pyramids at Giza. The Great Pyramid of Khufu represents an astonishing, yet perhaps carefully calculated, peak of administrative mobilization. But later pyramids built by subsequent pharaohs tell a different story. They are noticeably smaller, often constructed with rubble cores and inferior stone, then faced with fine limestone to maintain the illusion of grandeur. This is not a decline in architectural knowledge, but a likely sign of administrative and economic strain. The state machinery, once tuned for a single generational project, may have been pushed to its limits. The constant demand for labor, stone, and food for these colossal tombs, reign after reign, could have slowly drained the royal treasuries and exhausted the goodwill of the population. The bureaucracy, designed to serve a visionary goal, might have begun to serve only its own inertia, continuing the ritual of pyramid building long after the economic foundation could healthily support it. This pattern of overreach finds a clearer voice in the later Roman Empire. Some emperors, in their quest for personal legacy, initiated vast building programs that strained the imperial administration to breaking point. Projects were sometimes begun not from strategic need, but from a desire to outshine predecessors, leading to half-finished temples and bankrupted cities. The administrative machine, so brilliant at managing legions and aqueducts, became a tool for prestige rather than public good. The meticulous tax system, once an engine for building roads and baths, could be turned to fund these vanity projects, extracting wealth from the provinces until local economies buckled. The bureaucracy itself could grow bloated, more focused on internal procedure and securing its own privileges than on efficiently serving the state. When the administrative class becomes a powerful interest group in itself, its goal can shift from building the kingdom to preserving its own status, a form of institutional stagnation that saps vitality from the entire system. The most profound failure occurs when the system becomes divorced from the human reality it was meant to organize. The grandest administrative plan is worthless if it does not account for the resilience of the people and the land. A kingdom might have a perfect ledger for grain distribution, but if a series of poor harvests depletes the silos, the ledger only documents the famine. The labor tax, a brilliant tool for building infrastructure, becomes a source of deep resentment if it keeps farmers from their fields during critical planting seasons, year after year. We see hints of this in the eventual abandonment of places like Chaco Canyon or some Mayan city-states. The very ceremonial and trade networks that fueled their construction may have created unsustainable demand. The need to supply ever grander ceremonies with exotic goods, or to feed a non-producing ritual elite, could have placed unbearable pressure on local environments and social structures. The administrative and spiritual framework that once unified the community might have eventually felt like an inescapable burden, leading people to simply walk away from the great houses and temples, leaving them to the wind. These are not simple tales of collapse but complex lessons in balance. They reveal that an administrative system is not a magic spell but a powerful tool. Its health depends on a feedback loop with the society it manages. It must be responsive to economic limits, environmental shifts, and the well-being of the population. When the system stops listening, when it values monuments over people or procedure over purpose, it sows the seeds of its own irrelevance. The silent stones of a failed project are perhaps the most eloquent teachers. They ask us to remember that the ultimate test of any system, any innovation, is not the height of the tower it builds, but the durability of the foundation upon which it stands. This foundation is always inevitably human. The silent stones of a failed project ask a question only we can answer. How do we know any of this? We have no ancient board meetings to observe, no organizational charts hanging in a pharaoh's office. The truth is recovered by becoming archaeological detectives, learning to read a language written not in words, but in wear and tear, in layout and chemistry. The story of administration is hidden in the most mundane of clues, waiting for a trained eye to see the bustling office within the empty ruin. Consider the human body as an archive. In ancient Egypt, the skeletal remains of scribes tell a vivid tale. Archaeologists have noted a specific pattern of arthritis in the shoulders and spines of these individuals, coupled with grooves worn into their teeth. The posture of a lifetime spent hunched over a papyrus scroll left its mark on the bones. The tooth grooves came from the habit of holding a reed brush in the mouth while preparing a new sheet or mixing ink. These are not signs of hardship in the traditional sense, but occupational signatures, the physical proof of a specialized bureaucratic class. Their bodies became living records of their daily work, their skeletons a testament to a society that had created a role demanding such specific, repetitive labor. Even broken pieces of pottery can become vital financial records. In the ancient world, before cheap paper, people wrote on anything available. Ostraka, which are potsherds or flakes of limestone, were the scrap paper of antiquity. In Greece and Egypt, they were used for tax receipts, voter ballots, school exercises, and casual notes. An ostrakon found in the desert might bear a simple inscription, a name, a date, and an amount of grain delivered. This discarded fragment was a citizen's proof of payment, a tiny, durable piece of a vast accounting system. Finding a trash pit filled with such receipts is like discovering a shredded filing cabinet, each piece a puzzle fragment that, when assembled, reveals the flow of resources and the reach of the state's economic grasp. The very ground plan of a site is a frozen organizational chart. Look at the excavated remains of worker settlements, like those at Giza or Deir el-Medina. The layout is never random. Barracks are arranged in orderly rows, suggesting assigned housing. There are distinct areas for baking bread in industrial-sized ovens, for butchering meat, and for workshops repairing tools. The presence of a guarded gatehouse and a central administrative building speaks to controlled access and oversight. The size of grain silos can be calculated to estimate how many people they could feed and for how long. By mapping where trash was dumped, archaeologists can even infer social hierarchies, where officials lived versus common laborers. The architecture of daily life, from the width of a street to the location of a well, was a direct result of administrative decisions aimed at efficiency and control. Perhaps the most silent witnesses are the materials themselves. Modern science allows us to interrogate the stones. Through chemical analysis like X-ray fluorescence, researchers can determine the precise elemental fingerprint of a block of limestone or a batch of mortar. They can then match that fingerprint to a specific quarry, sometimes hundreds of miles away. This creates a map of material movement that no scribe ever needed to write down. It proves with cold, hard data that a block in a temple in Thebes came from a quarry near Aswan. It traces the supply chain in a way that reveals the scale and reliability of the logistics network. Similarly, analyzing the pollen or phytoliths, tiny plant silica bodies, trapped in ancient mortar or mud bricks, can tell us what season a structure was built, based on what plants were flowering and being used as temper. This turns a wall into a calendar. The work of these detectives is a constant process of connection. A single clay tablet from Mesopotamia listing wages paid in barley must be connected to the archaeological evidence of standardized ration bowls. The blueprint for a Roman aqueduct, preserved on a stone carving, is cross-referenced with the actual slope of the ruins across the countryside to understand the surveyor's precision. Each clue is a pixel. The historian's task is to step back to see the emerging picture not of gods and kings in isolation, but of the humming, paperwork-driven machine that made their visions possible. They transform inventory lists into insight and worker barracks into an understanding of social contract. The grand narrative of history is built upon a foundation of these small, recovered truths, where every worn bone and stamped sherd whispers a part of the story of how humanity first learned to organize itself on a colossal scale. That worn scribe's shoulder bone and the quarry's chemical signature are more than ancient history. They are the first pages in a very modern manual. The ghost of these ancient administrators does not haunt ruins. It lives in the air-conditioned offices of every major construction firm, tech startup, and space agency on the planet. We have simply traded clay tablets for cloud servers and royal decrees for digital dashboards, but the core puzzles remain hauntingly familiar. The specialized terms of modern project management, ideas like critical path analysis, resource allocation, and supply chain logistics, are not inventions of the industrial age. They are the direct descendants of solutions first scribbled in dust thousands of years ago. Think of the critical path, that sequence of dependent tasks that determines the shortest possible project duration. A modern foreman plots this on a Gantt chart, a visual timeline of interconnected jobs. The master builder of a Gothic cathedral held the same map in his mind. He knew the foundation must be complete before the walls could rise. The walls must be braced before the vaults could be sprung, and the stained glass could only be installed after the roof sealed the space from the rain. His critical path was dictated by physics, season, and the availability of specialized guilds, and missing a step meant a winter of idle, hungry workers. The pharaoh's project manager faced the same dependency, understanding that the quarry team's schedule dictated the barge captain's departure, which in turn dictated when the ramp crews and masons at the pyramid needed to be ready. Their Gantt chart was etched in seasonal flood calendars and star charts. Resource allocation has simply been digitized. The vizier who allocated X number of work gangs from the delta and Y bushels of grain from Upper Egypt was performing the same function as a modern project manager using software to assign crew hours and budget materials down to the last nail. The Minoan palace, redistributing olive oil, wool, and bronze to its workshops, was running an ancient enterprise resource planning system. Their ledger was clay, ours is silicon, but the goal is identical: to match finite resources to a complex set of needs without waste or shortage. Even the concept of a buffer stock, that extra supply kept on hand to prevent delays, is straight from the ancient playbook. The storage yards at Giza, holding a reserve of stone blocks, served the same purpose as the just-in-time inventory warehouses that feed a modern assembly line, a hedge against uncertainty in a fragile chain. Perhaps the clearest lineage is in supply chain management. The Aksumite engineers who designed obelisks with built-in handles were engaging in design for logistics, a cutting-edge concept today where products are designed from the start to be efficiently packaged, shipped, and assembled. Their innovation was to make the object itself easier to move. The Khmer administrators who timed sandstone shipments to the monsoon floods were masters of seasonal logistics, aligning transport with natural cycles to maximize efficiency, much like modern shipping companies plan around trade winds or holiday rushes. The Courier network of the Persian Royal Road was the ancient internet, a dedicated information highway designed for one purpose: to synchronize action across vast distances. Today, we use satellite GPS and real-time tracking, but the imperative is unchanged: to know where things are so you can plan where they need to be. This profound continuity reveals something essential about human ambition. The core challenges of organizing complex endeavors are timeless. How do you break a monumental vision into manageable tasks? How do you coordinate many specialized hands? How do you move physical things across space and time? How do you pay for it all? The solutions first forged in the heat of ancient ambition: the standardized measurement, the professional guild, the audit trail, the tiered bureaucracy, were the foundational code. We have spent millennia refining that code, adding layers of technology and theory, but the operating system is remarkably familiar. The modern project manager, staring at a screen filled with charts, is asking the very same questions that once troubled a scribe in the shadow of a rising pyramid. This connection is not a quaint historical footnote. It is a reminder that our greatest structures, whether of stone, steel, or software, will always rest upon the oldest and most human foundation of all: the ability to organize a shared dream into a step-by-step reality. The true wonder of these systems is that they were profoundly, brilliantly human, yet that very humanity is often the first thing stripped away by our modern myths. We look at a seamless joint between 20-ton stones and our imagination fails, so we leap to stories of lost super-civilizations or otherworldly architects. We see the staggering scale and assume it must have been built on a foundation of endless, anonymous suffering. These narratives are seductive, but they do something deeply disservice. They rob the past of its ingenuity and its people of their agency. The administrative record, however, tells a different and far more compelling truth. It shows us that the real magic was not in supernatural help, but in superbly organized human effort. Take the idea of so-called impossible precision. How could ancient cultures without lasers or computers achieve such flawless alignments or cut stones that fit together without a hair's breadth between them? The answer is not a mystery, it is a method, one revealed by the tools and texts they left behind. The Egyptians, for example, used simple but devastatingly effective instruments. A merk, it was a sighting tool made from a palm rib with a slit in it, used with a plumb line. By observing the transit of specific stars across the slit, surveyors could establish true north with astonishing accuracy. They used water-filled trenches to level foundations over vast distances, exploiting water's natural tendency to find its own level. The precision was not instantaneous, it was iterative. They checked and rechecked and corrected over time. The administrative system enabled this patience, providing the stable workforce and sustained funding that allowed for such meticulous, generation-spanning work. There were no alien blueprints, only countless trials, observations, and corrections, logged and passed down through a guild of master builders. The stones fit because generations of artisans refined the craft of dressing them, using harder stone hammers and abrasive sand to grind surfaces flat through relentless, skilled labor. The technology was not lost, it was simply rendered obsolete by iron and steel. To credit aliens is to ignore the mountain of physical evidence for human problem solving. Similarly, the shadow of the slave driver over these works is a vast oversimplification. The administrative papyri and ostraca paint a picture of a complex labor economy. Yes, there was conscripted labor, the corvée system where citizens fulfilled a periodic duty to the state, but this was often framed as a religious or civic obligation, a temporary service that, in return, provided food, shelter, and a sense of participating in a grand communal project. The records from Deir el-Medina, the village of the royal tomb workers in Egypt, are particularly revealing. These were skilled artisans, not slaves. They received regular monthly wages in the form of grain, fish, vegetables, and the tools of their trade. They worked in crews with names like the Friends of Khufu and had 2 days off in 10. They could own property, file legal complaints, and even went on strike when their rations were delayed, an event meticulously documented in administrative records. This was not the life of a chained laborer. The workforce was typically a pyramid. At the base, a large number of conscripted laborers, often farmers working during the inundation season when fields were flooded. They did the heavy, unskilled hauling and earth moving. Above them were the skilled craftsmen, the stonemasons, carpenters, and metal workers, who were often compensated and housed by the state. At the peak were the master architects and engineers, the literate administrators who planned the whole endeavor. This mixed model was not only practical, it was sustainable. A purely slave-based system is volatile and inefficient, requiring constant coercion and facing high rates of attrition and sabotage. A system that incorporated skilled, invested workers created stability, preserved crucial knowledge, and fostered innovation. The administrative machine needed willing hands as much as strong ones. It needed people who took pride in their work because that pride translated into precision. The truth is, these wonders were built by societies, not just by sovereigns. They were collective enterprises funded by taxes, fueled by belief, and realized by a spectrum of human contribution, from the obligated labor of the citizen to the lifetime dedication of the master artisan. To reduce this intricate social contract to a simple tale of whips and chains is to miss the real story, a story of how human communities once organized themselves to achieve the seemingly impossible. It is a story not of oppression but of a staggering collective agreement. A flawless plan is only a guess until it meets reality. The final, and perhaps most subtle, administrative innovation was not about preventing mistakes, but about learning from them. Truly sophisticated systems built in a capacity for failure analysis and adaptation, turning disaster into data and collapse into curriculum. This was institutional learning in its earliest form, a quiet acknowledgement that even the grandest blueprint was a hypothesis to be tested by stone and time. The evidence for this is not in what they built perfectly, but in what they changed after something went wrong. Look at the evolution of the Egyptian pyramid itself. The very first attempts, like the step pyramid of Djoser, were experiments in form. Later, the builders of the bent pyramid at Dosha began constructing it with the steep sides typical of earlier designs. Midway through, the structure showed alarming signs of stress, with the underlying geology and the angle of the walls creating dangerous instability. The ancient project managers faced a crisis. Their response was not to hide the flaw or abandon the site, but to adapt. They changed the angle of the upper portion to a shallower slope, creating the distinctive bent shape we see today. This was not an aesthetic choice, it was a course correction born of observed failure. The knowledge gained from this near disaster was then applied to the next project, the nearby Red Pyramid, which was built successfully from the ground up with a gentler, more stable slope. This progression from step to bent to true smooth-sided pyramid is not a random sequence. It is a visible record of trial, error, and applied learning across generations of engineers and administrators. The mechanism for this learning was likely embedded in the bureaucracy itself. We can imagine the process. When a wall cracked or a ramp subsided, the site foreman would not merely order a repair. He was likely required to send a formal report, perhaps on a clay tablet or papyrus scroll, to the central administration. This report would detail the nature of the failure, the conditions under which it occurred, and the immediate corrective action taken. A council of senior architects and engineers, the ancient equivalent of a review board, would then analyze the incident. They would ask questions. Was the foundation material unsuitable? Was the mortar mix weak? Was the load-bearing angle too acute? Their conclusions would be codified into new construction standards, amendments to the master building codes that were then disseminated to all active sites. This is how a technique evolved from one project to the next. Consider Roman bridge building. The Romans were master engineers, but their early bridges sometimes failed, often due to scour, the erosion of riverbed material from around the piers by fast-moving water. Each collapse was a costly lesson. Over time, through observation and documentation, Roman engineers developed standard countermeasures. They began designing bridges with larger, deeper foundations, and they introduced cutwaters, those triangular upstream projections on piers that split the current and reduced erosion. These features became hallmarks of later Roman bridges, not because of a single genius, but because the administrative system of the Roman Corps of Engineers captured the hard-won knowledge from each failure and made it standard practice for the future. This capacity for adaptation required a culture that valued truth over blame. An administration that punished every foreman for a structural flaw would soon receive only reports of perfect progress, hiding the very problems that needed solving. A learning system, by contrast, had to incentivize honest reporting. It likely distinguished between negligence, which was punishable, and unforeseen material failure, which was a source of vital information. The scribe who documented a crack was not recording a mistake. He was contributing to the kingdom's growing library of engineering knowledge. This long-term institutional memory is what separated a flash in the pan construction feat from a sustained architectural tradition. A single project might be completed by a charismatic leader, but only a system that could learn and adapt could produce a lineage of ever more refined structures over centuries. The great Gothic cathedrals show this beautifully. The drive for unprecedented height in the 12th century led to terrifying collapses, like the falling vaults at the Cathedral of Beauvais. After each disaster, master masons from across Europe would gather, examine the rubble, and debate the causes. They then iterated on their designs, strengthening walls, refining the shape of arches, and ultimately perfecting the flying buttress as a solution. The knowledge spread not by royal decree, but through the guild network, a professional community dedicated to sharing hard lessons. This was decentralized yet highly effective adaptation. The ultimate testament to this innovative spirit is not a monument that never faltered, but the subtle changes in the stones themselves, the adjusted angles, the reinforced joints, the new standard templates issued after an old one proved insufficient. It reveals a humble, pragmatic wisdom at the heart of these seemingly arrogant enterprises. They understood that the path to building for eternity was paved with the broken stones of yesterday's ambitions, each one a teacher. The path to monumental achievement was never a single road. While the pharaoh's will was law, flowing from a divine source down through a hierarchy of priests and officials, another civilization on the opposite side of the world was perfecting a different kind of engine for collective action. To truly grasp the power of administrative innovation, we must widen our lens and compare these distinct cultural blueprints. Consider the centralized God-king model of ancient Egypt, where authority was absolute and descended from the heavens, against the later, sprawling meritocracy of imperial China, where a vast bureaucracy was staffed not by birthright but by examination. This is not about declaring one superior, but about marveling at the diverse administrative toolkits humanity invented to solve the same epic puzzle: how to marshal a civilization's full strength toward a single, staggering goal. The Egyptian system was a masterpiece of vertical integration. Power originated with the pharaoh, a living god, and radiated downward through a clear, sacred chain. The vizier, the chief administrator, acted as the royal will incarnate, translating divine command into logistical reality. Provincial governors implemented orders, and scribes documented every transaction. This model created incredible focus and speed for a specific royal project. When a pharaoh decreed a pyramid, the entire administrative machinery of the state could pivot to serve that one objective, reallocating labor, food, and materials with breathtaking efficiency. The system's strength was its unity of purpose, its ability to act as a single organism, but its scope was inherently tied to the ruler's vision and lifespan. It was a sprint of concentrated power. Imperial China, particularly from the Qin and Han dynasties onward, engineered a different kind of powerhouse, one built for endurance and scale. While the emperor held ultimate authority, the day-to-day administration of the empire was carried out by a vast civil service, a bureaucracy of staggering complexity. The revolutionary tool was the imperial examination system. Instead of relying on noble birth or military prowess to fill government posts, China opened the door to talent, at least in theory. Men from across the empire could study the classic texts of philosophy and statecraft, sit for grueling multi-day exams, and earn a position based on demonstrated knowledge and literary skill. This created a self-perpetuating class of administrators. The mandarins, who were literate, shared a common ideological framework and were loyal to the system that elevated them. This meritocratic engine was designed to manage continuity, to govern an empire of millions across centuries through multiple changes in dynasty. These contrasting models directly shaped the kinds of wonders they built. Egypt's centralized sprint produced the concentrated, awe-inspiring pyramid, a single-point project of definitive scale. China's bureaucratic marathon enabled something entirely different: continuous, continent-spanning infrastructure. The Grand Canal is the perfect testament to this. First linking sections under the Sui dynasty and expanded over centuries, it became a 1,200-mile artificial river connecting the fertile Yangtze Basin to the political heart in the north. No single emperor built it in a lifetime. It was the work of generations of administrators, each building upon the surveys, labor quotas, and engineering reports of their predecessors. The project required coordinating millions of conscripted workers, managing immense budgets for food and tools, and solving hydraulic engineering problems across wildly varied terrain. The meritocratic bureaucracy provided the institutional memory and the steady, long-term management such a century-spanning endeavor demanded. It was not a monument to a single god-king, but to the administrative state itself, a machine that could outlast any individual ruler. The systems also managed their human resources in fundamentally different ways. In Egypt, the labor force for a pyramid was often a temporary, massive mobilization, a corvée duty framed as service to the divine. In China, the state's relationship with labor for mega projects was more systematic and continuous, embedded in a vast tax and conscription system that could draw on populations for frontier walls, canals, and palaces as a regular function of government. The Chinese bureaucratic toolkit included standardized units of measurement and weight, just like Egypt, but applied them across a far larger and more diverse geographic canvas. Their officials maintained meticulous census records to track the population for tax and labor purposes, and developed advanced mathematics for engineering and accounting. The administrative goal was not a single dazzling spectacle, but the perpetual maintenance of order, prosperity, and defense across a subcontinent, with construction as a perpetual tool of state policy. So we see two brilliant solutions to the same equation. One system channeled absolute, divinely sanctioned authority into a focused beam of effort, creating timeless icons of concentrated power. The other cultivated a self-renewing class of generalist administrators to govern the slow, intricate work of binding a civilization together with stone and water. The Egyptian model asked, how do we build the ultimate expression of our king's divinity? The Chinese model asked, how do we manage an empire for 1,000 years? Their answers gave us both the piercing apex of the pyramid and the enduring connective flow of the canal. This comparison reveals that the greatest administrative innovation of all may have been the understanding that there is no one right way to organize a miracle, only different tools for different scales of time and ambition. The king's vision and the master mason's genius were separated by a crucial layer of reality, the men who turned grand pronouncements into daily tallies. These were not the faces carved into temple walls, but the hands that held the stylus and the voices that called the roll. To understand how these administrative systems truly functioned, we must meet their unsung heroes, the scribes, overseers, and clerks, the middle managers of antiquity. Their world was one of papyrus and patience, of ledgers and logistics, where the fate of a project rested on the accuracy of a single notation. Take the Egyptian scribe, a figure of immense social standing. His training began in childhood at a scribble school, a rigorous and often harsh environment where boys learned the intricate hieroglyphic and hieratic scripts by relentless copying. They memorized lists of goods, standard formulas for letters, and the complex mathematics needed for calculating rations, volumes, and work rates. A single mistake in a multiplication could mean a work crew went hungry or a shipment of stone arrived incomplete. This was not a clerical job, it was a profession of immense trust. The scribe was the human interface between the abstract plan and the physical world. Stationed at a quarry, he would count the blocks as they were cut, inscribe them with quarry marks and rain years, and prepare the shipping manifest for the barge captain. At the construction site, he recorded the daily attendance of work gangs, noted tools issued and broken, and tallied the distribution of food from the state granaries. His ledger was the project's memory and its conscience. Alongside him worked the overseer, the foreman of the ancient world. This was a man who understood both the work and the workers. He might have risen from the ranks of skilled masons, a person who knew how to dress a stone and also how to motivate a team to move it. His responsibility was direct and immense. An overseer at a limestone quarry was accountable for the safety of his men, the pace of extraction to meet the construction schedule, and the quality of the stone being sent downstream. He enforced the royal cubit standard, ensuring every block met specification. He mediated disputes, maintained discipline, and was the critical link in the chain of command, translating the scribe's written orders into shouted instructions over the din of hammers. His success was measured in tangible outcomes: the steady flow of perfect blocks from the cliff face, the absence of delays, and the health of his crew. A good overseer was worth his weight in gold, for he was the one who turned administrative theory into productive, daily rhythm. The life of these individuals was one of relentless detail. Imagine the clerk in a Minoan palace storeroom, surrounded by towering pithoi jars of olive oil. His day was spent checking seals, dipping measuring rods to gauge levels, and updating the linear tablets that tracked every drop. A discrepancy between his count and the Central Archives record would trigger an inquiry. Or picture the Assyrian quartermaster for a royal building project, responsible for the thousands of copper nails, wooden beams, and baskets of bitumen needed. He had to forecast needs weeks in advance, submit requisitions, and verify the quality of incoming goods against state standards. His work was a constant battle against entropy, against loss, waste, and human error. These were not glamorous posts. They were defined by the smell of ink and dust, by the ache of a hunched shoulder, and by the quiet satisfaction of a balanced ledger at the end of a long month. Yet within this granular reality lay their true power. The scribe's mark on a tablet was not just a record, it was an act of authority. By writing down that a worker received his grain ration, the scribe made that transaction official, permanent, and auditable. He created the very data that allowed the central administration to see patterns, to spot inefficiency, and to plan for the future. The overseer's shout on the ramp was the enforcement of a universal standard. When he rejected a poorly cut stone, he was upholding the geometric purity of the entire design. These individuals were the living capillaries of the administrative body, carrying the lifeblood of information and instruction to every extremity of the project. They were the guarantors that the system, for all its grand design, actually worked on the ground with real people and real materials. We sometimes find poignant glimpses of their personal lives in the debris of history. In Egypt, scribes sometimes doodled in the margins of official documents, sketching animals or writing playful verses. At Deir el-Medina, workers left ostraka with personal notes, complaints about a neighbor, or records of a small debt. These artifacts remind us that these administrators were not cogs in a machine, but individuals with families, frustrations, and a sense of humor. They got tired, they made private notes, they grumbled about their superiors. This humanity within the bureaucratic machine is perhaps the most telling detail of all. It shows that these systems were operated by people who bought into the larger mission, who took pride in their specialized role, and who understood that their meticulous, often tedious work was the essential mortar holding the entire ambitious enterprise together. Without their faithful hands and watchful eyes, the most brilliant administrative innovation would have remained just a theory, a dream in a king's chamber, never rising into the sky. That final, silent agreement between the king and the mason was not a miracle, but the output of a machine. We have spent our journey examining the individual gears and levers, from the royal cubit to the courier's horse. But to truly grasp the power of these ancient systems, we must step back and see the entire blueprint laid out before us, the interconnected design that could transform a modest kingdom into a legendary construction powerhouse. This was not a random collection of good ideas, it was a synergistic engine where each component amplified the others, creating a capability far greater than the sum of its parts. Picture this not as a list but as a living circuit board where power flows from one innovation to the next. It begins with a single, critical spark: standardization. A common language of measurement, weight, and volume. This is the foundational voltage that makes everything else possible. Without it, the entire system shorts out in a chaos of conflicting instructions. But that standard alone is just a silent rule. It needs a voice, a memory. This is where the second component, centralized record keeping, activates. The archive gives the standard a history and a future. It turns a measurement into a budget, tracking what was used, what remains, and what is needed. Now the system has data, yet data cannot cut stone or bake bread. So the third component engages the cultivation of specialized labor. By investing in permanent core of artisans, the kingdom transforms raw human potential into reliable, high-precision skill. The masons, carpenters, and metalworkers become the system's skilled hands, but skilled hands are useless if the materials never arrive. This triggers the fourth, immensely complex component: logistics and supply chain management. The kingdom must now become a master of timing and motion, synchronizing quarries, rivers, roads, and storage yards into a rhythmic flow that delivers the right resources to the exact point of need at the precise moment. This flow, however, moves through a landscape owned by people. To prevent conflict and ensure smooth passage, the fifth component, legal frameworks for land and resource allocation, must be in place. These laws and compensation systems grease the wheels, turning potential disputes into orderly transactions and providing the social legitimacy for the massive reallocation of assets. Yet, even with perfect laws, a delay at a distant quarry can cripple the entire site if no one knows about it. This demands the sixth component, a rapid communication network. The courier system acts as the kingdom's nervous system, carrying status reports and updated orders, allowing the central administration to adapt in real time, to solve problems before they cascade into disaster. And who is receiving these messages, making these adjustments? The seventh and final structural component, the tiered bureaucracy with clear delegated authority. This is the organizational chassis that holds everything together. It distributes the immense cognitive load, creates clear lines of accountability, and ensures that a decision made in the capital translates into action on the ground without requiring the king to supervise every single task. This is the complete administrative blueprint, but a blueprint is inert. What brings it to life? What sends the first pulse of power through this entire circuit? It is the unifying purpose, the compelling why that could be a divine mandate, a promise of communal security, or the prestige of a trading empire. This purpose is the power source. It motivates the farmer to pay his grain tax, inspires the scribe to keep perfect records, and gives the mason pride in his precise cut. The local conditions, the geography, the economy, are the unique wiring diagram. A kingdom with a great river like Egypt will route its logistics through water. A kingdom of Highland trade like Aksum will wire its system for currency and adapted masonry. A kingdom of monsoon floods like the Khmer will build its entire circuit around hydraulic management. The genius was never in copying a single model, but in understanding the principles of the blueprint and then skillfully adapting the wiring to their own specific environment. The true construction powerhouse emerged when a kingdom successfully integrated all 7 components, energized them with a unifying purpose, and tailored the design to the realities of their land and people. The wonder that rose into the sky was simply the physical proof that this complex, human-built administrative machine was operating at full capacity. It was the ultimate receipt, stamped not in clay but in limestone and granite, for a society that had learned to organize its collective dream into a step-by-step reality. That final stone, placed with ceremony, marked the end of a physical journey, but the invisible journey, the one of ledgers and logistics, of quotas and quality control, never truly ended. It simply became the new standard, the operating system for a civilization. As we have seen, the true wonder of the ancient world was not just the soaring pyramid or the sprawling temple complex. It was the silent, relentless machinery of administration that made the stone dream real. These were not just clever tricks for moving rock. The innovations in measurement, logistics, labor organization, and record-keeping represent one of humanity's most profound leaps. They are the story of how we learn to collaborate not just in small tribes, but across entire kingdoms and generations, turning chaotic individual effort into a symphony of collective purpose. They remind us in the most tangible way possible that history's greatest physical achievements were built not merely on the strength of backs, but on the organized power of minds. This perspective changes everything. The next time you see an image of an ancient wonder, let your eye travel beyond the majestic facade. See the ghost of the system that built it. See the royal cubit in the perfect joints, the grain tax in the fed workers, the courier's road in the aligned stones, and the scribe's meticulous tally in the flawless symmetry. See it not as a static artifact, but as the frozen pinnacle of a vast, humming human system. It is a testament to our species' unique ability to translate a shared vision into a step-by-step reality, to build cathedrals in the sky because we first learned to build frameworks on paper. If this deep dive into the hidden blueprints of history has shifted how you see the past, there are countless more mysteries to decode. Consider subscribing to continue the exploration. And we would love to hear your thoughts. In the comments, share which of these administrative innovations you find most impressive. Was it the standardization that created a common language, or the legal frameworks that turned conflict into cooperation? The conversation about how we build together is one that stretches from ancient quarries to modern boardrooms, and it starts with you.